My mom abandoned us when I was 16. Years later, she reappeared wanting to invest in my company. I uncovered a shocking truth. I'm Ethan, 28M, and I never thought I'd be sharing my story like this, but here goes. I grew up in a small town. My parents, Lizzie, 52F, and Tyler, 54M, ran the local hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. Our house was small but cozy, with a big backyard where Dad and I would spend hours playing catch or working on our ramshackle treehouse. Mom always had a pot of something delicious simmering on the stove, filling the house with mouth-watering aromas. Those were good times, simple but happy. I was an only child, but I never felt lonely. My best friend, Mike, 28M, lived next door, and we were inseparable from the moment we could toddle. We'd spend our summers exploring the woods behind our houses, pretending to be adventurers, discovering new lands. In winter, we'd have epic snowball fights and build elaborate snow forts. School was, well, school. I was a decent student, not top of the class, but not struggling either. I loved math and science, always curious about how things worked. My teachers often told my parents I had potential, but in a small town like ours, potential usually meant maybe getting a management position at the local factory. Life wasn't always easy. There were times when money was tight, especially during the recession when people weren't spending much on home improvements. I remember overhearing hushed arguments between Mom and Dad about bills, but they always put on brave faces for me. Dad would pick up odd jobs around town, fixing fences, mowing lawns, anything to make ends meet. Mom started selling homemade jams and preserves at the local farmer's market. Despite the financial struggles, we were happy, or so I thought. Looking back, maybe I was just too young to see the cracks forming in our family foundation. Everything changed the day I turned 16. It was a Friday, and I was excited about getting my learner's permit. Dad had promised to take me for my first driving lesson that weekend. I practically floated through the school day, daydreaming about the freedom that came with being able to drive. I burst through the front door after school, ready to celebrate with my parents, but instead of the birthday surprise I was expecting, I found Dad sitting alone at the kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. His eyes were red and puffy, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Dad?" I remember asking, my excitement evaporating instantly. "What's wrong? Where's Mom?" He looked at me, and I'll never forget the pain in his eyes. "She's gone, son," he said, his voice rough. "Your mother. She left us." I didn't understand at first. Left us? Like, went on a trip? But as Dad explained, the reality sank in. Mom had packed her bags and disappeared. No note, no explanation, nothing. She'd kissed me goodbye that morning like any other day, told me to have a good day at school, and then vanished. The next few weeks were a blur. Dad tried to keep it together, but I could see him falling apart. He started drinking more, staying out late at the local bar. The hardware store suffered. He'd forget to order stock or show up late to open. I had to grow up fast, taking care of the house and myself while trying to keep my grades up. Mike was a godsend during this time. He'd come over after school, help me clean up, make sure I ate. His parents, bless them, often invited me over for dinner, trying to give me some sense of normalcy. Despite everything, I managed to keep my grades up. My teachers were understanding, giving me extra time on assignments when I needed it. Mrs. Thompson, my math teacher, even stayed after school to tutor me when she saw I was falling behind. As months turned into years, life settled into a new normal. Dad eventually pulled himself together, mostly. He still had his bad days, especially around Mom's birthday or their anniversary, but he was trying. He quit drinking, threw himself into the hardware store, determined to make it succeed. I buried myself in my studies, determined to make something of myself. I wanted to make Dad proud, to show him that he hadn't failed as a parent, just because Mom left. When I got accepted into a good college on a scholarship, the look of pride on his face made all the late nights studying worth it. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Dad hugged me tightly, telling me how proud he was. As I drove away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, standing alone in front of our house. It broke my heart a little, but I was also excited for this new chapter in my life. College was a whole new world. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my history, who didn't look at me with pity or whisper about that poor boy whose mother ran off. I could reinvent myself, and I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. I majored in computer science, fascinated by the potential of technology to change the world. I made new friends, joined clubs, even dated a bit. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But life had other plans. Just a week after my graduation, as I was preparing to start my new job at a tech startup in the city, I got a call from our neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. Dad had had a massive heart attack. By the time I made it back to Millbrook, he was gone. The doctors said years of stress and heavy drinking had weakened his heart. I was devastated. I had lost both my parents in different ways, but the pain was equally intense. The funeral was a blur of sympathetic faces and casseroles, people telling me how sorry they were, how proud my dad had been of me. After the funeral, I threw myself into work. The startup job was demanding, with long hours and high pressure, but I welcomed it. It kept me from dwelling on my grief. That's when I met Simone, 26F. She was the startup's UX designer, brilliant and kind. We bonded over late-night coding sessions and shared takeout dinners. Simone was patient with me, understanding the walls I'd built around myself. Slowly, she helped me open up, to trust again. When I finally told her my whole story, about Mom leaving and Dad's struggles, she held me as I cried for the first time since Dad's funeral. With Simone's encouragement, I started my own software company. We developed an app that helped small businesses manage their inventory and finances, inspired by the struggles I'd seen my parents go through with the hardware store. It took off faster than we expected. Suddenly, I was giving interviews, appearing on podcasts, talking about my journey from a small-town kid to a successful entrepreneur. I was careful never to mention Mom in these interviews, focusing instead on Dad's influence and the lessons I'd learned from him. That's when things got weird. I started getting messages from people claiming to be my long-lost mother. Most were obvious scams, but one caught my attention. This person knew things about my childhood that I'd never shared publicly. My favorite meal, Dad's homemade lasagna, the name of my first pet, a goldfish named Bubbles, even the treehouse Dad and I built when I was 8. I showed the messages to Simone. She was cautious but encouraged me to dig deeper. We looked at the account that messaged me. The woman in the photos looked like an older version of my mom. According to her profile, she was living in California, married to a man named Robert. Against my better judgment, I responded. She said she wanted to meet, to explain everything. She was willing to fly to New York, where I live now. Simone thought it might give me closure, so I agreed. We met at a cafe near my office. Mom, I guess I should call her Lizzie now, looked older, but I recognized her immediately. She told me she left because she felt trapped in our small town. She said she and Dad fought constantly about money, and she couldn't take it anymore. She met Robert on a business trip and decided to start a new life with him. I was angry. How could she abandon her family without a word? But a part of me was curious. She seemed genuinely remorseful. She told me about her life in California, how she and Robert had built a successful real estate business. Then she dropped a bombshell. Robert wanted to invest in my company. I was conflicted. On one hand, this could be huge for my business. On the other, could I really trust these people who had swooped back into my life so suddenly? I told her I'd think about it. That's where things stand now. Simone thinks I should be cautious, but says it's my decision. I'm torn between the potential for my business and the anger I still feel towards Lizzie for abandoning us. Am I wrong for even considering this? Should I just tell her to get lost? Update 1. It's been a couple of weeks since my last post, and a lot has happened. After much deliberation and several long conversations with Simone, I decided to do some digging before making any decisions about Lizzie and Robert's offer. I hired a private investigator to look into their background, focusing on their business dealings and any potential red flags. The process was nerve-wracking. Every day, I'd check my email obsessively, hoping for an update from the PI. Simone tried to keep me distracted, suggesting we work on new features for our app or go for long walks in Central Park. But my mind always wandered back to Lizzie and the mysteries surrounding her disappearance and sudden reappearance in my life. While waiting for the PI's report, I found myself reflecting on my childhood, trying to remember any signs that might have hinted at Lizzie's unhappiness. I recalled a family vacation to the beach when I was about 10. Dad was excited about building sandcastles and flying kites, but Mom seemed distant, often staring out at the horizon with a wistful look in her eyes. At the time, I thought she was just tired from the long drive. Now, I wonder if she was already dreaming of escape. I also remembered the Christmas when I was 14. Mom had seemed distracted, often checking her phone and smiling at texts. When Dad asked who she was texting so much, she said it was just work stuff. Was that when her affair with Robert began? These memories swirled in my head, mixing with the anger and hurt I'd carried for years. I found myself snapping at Simone over little things, then immediately feeling guilty. She was endlessly patient, reminding me that it was okay to feel conflicted and confused. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the PI's report arrived. What he found was interesting, to say the least. Robert and Lizzie's real estate business in California is legitimate, but it's not nearly as successful as they made it out to be. They've had several lawsuits filed against them for breach of contract and misrepresentation. Nothing criminal, but definitely shady. But here's where it gets really weird. The PI found photos of Lizzie and Robert together dating back to when I was 14, 2 years before she left us. In one photo, they were clearly on vacation together at a beach resort. The timestamp on the photo was during a week when Lizzie told Dad she was visiting her sick aunt. I was furious. Not only had she abandoned us, but she'd been lying and cheating for years before that. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. I spent a sleepless night pacing our apartment, alternating between rage and despair. Simone stayed up with me, making cups of tea and just listening as I ranted and cried. The next day, I called Lizzie and asked to meet again. We met at the same cafe as before. This time, I wasn't nervous, I was angry. As soon as she sat down, I confronted her with the information from the PI's report. At first, she tried to deny it, claiming the photos must be fake, but when I showed her the metadata proving their authenticity, she broke down. Lizzie admitted that she and Robert had been having an affair for years. She said she felt trapped in her marriage to my dad and in our small-town life. Robert had promised her excitement, travel, and a luxurious lifestyle. She claimed she stayed for as long as she did because of me, but ultimately decided to leave when Robert pressured her to make a choice. As she spoke, I found myself thinking about Dad. How he must have felt, suspecting something was wrong but not knowing what. How he blamed himself for years after she left, thinking he hadn't been a good enough husband. The anger I felt towards Lizzie intensified. I asked her about the investment offer. She hesitated, then admitted that their business wasn't doing well. They had heard about my success and thought that investing in my company could help them recover their losses. Essentially, they were trying to use me to bail themselves out. I was disgusted. I told Lizzie that I wanted nothing to do with her or Robert. I said that she made her choice years ago, and she had to live with it. She tried to apologize, saying she regretted her actions, but I cut her off. I told her not to contact me again and left. The walk back to my office was a blur. I canceled my meetings for the rest of the day and went home. When I got there, I broke down. Simone held me as I cried, letting out years of pent-up anger and hurt. We talked for hours, and she helped me see that while Lizzie's actions were inexcusable, Holding on to this anger wasn't healthy for me. That night, as we lay in bed, Simone asked me what I wanted to do next. I realized that for the first time in years, I felt lighter. The mystery of why Lizzie left, the question of whether it was somehow my fault, those burdens were gone. I knew now that Lizzie's leaving wasn't about me or even really about Dad. It was about her own selfish desires. I've decided to focus on my company and my future with Simone. We're talking about starting a family of our own, and I'm determined to be the kind of parent my dad was. Present, loving, and committed, no matter what. The pain of Lizzie's abandonment will always be a part of my story, but it doesn't have to define my future. As for the company, we're pushing forward with some exciting new projects. I'm channeling my energy into work, determined to succeed not in spite of my past, but because of the strength it's given me. Simone and I are also talking about setting up a scholarship fund for kids from single-parent households in Millbrook. It feels like a way to honor Dad's memory and give back to the community that supported me. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. Update 2. It's been about a month since my confrontation with Lizzie, and things have mostly calmed down. I've been focusing on my work and my relationship with Simone, trying to move past all the drama. We've been making progress on the scholarship fund idea, reaching out to my old high school to discuss how we can set it up. But of course, life had other plans. Last week, I received a letter from a law firm representing Robert. Apparently, he's suing me for defamation. He claims that by telling people about their shady business practices, I've damaged their reputation and caused them significant financial losses. I was shocked. I hadn't told anyone except Simone and my closest friend Mike about what the PI had found. I certainly hadn't gone public with any of it. The letter was vague about the specifics of the alleged defamation, which made me even more suspicious. I immediately called my company's legal team. They advised me to gather all the evidence I had and prepare for a potential court battle. We spent the next few days compiling everything: the PI's report, my correspondence with Lizzie, even the receipt from the cafe where we met. As we dug deeper, we discovered something interesting. It turns out that Robert and Lizzie had been approaching other successful young entrepreneurs with similar stories and investment offers. Some had fallen for it and lost money. Others, like me, had turned them down. But Robert had never sued any of them before. This information came from a chance conversation with a fellow tech entrepreneur at a networking event. When I mentioned the lawsuit, without going into specifics, he got a strange look on his face and asked if it involved a couple from California. It turned out he'd had a similar experience a year ago. My lawyers think this is a desperate attempt to intimidate me into giving them money. They believe Robert and Lizzie are in serious financial trouble and are grasping at straws. The lawsuit, even though it seems baseless, could potentially harm my company's reputation. Some of our investors are getting nervous, calling to ask about the situation. I've had to spend a lot of time reassuring them, explaining that we're fighting these false allegations. It's stressful, having to constantly defend myself against lies. There are moments when I wonder if it would be easier to just pay them off, to make them go away. But then I think about how that would be letting them win, letting them continue their schemes. Simone has been my rock through all of this. She's been handling a lot of the day-to-day operations of the company, allowing me to focus on this legal mess. She sat with me through late-night strategy sessions with the lawyers, brought me coffee during early morning conference calls, and held me when the stress gets to be too much. I'm trying to stay positive, but some days are harder than others. The betrayal I feel from Lizzie has been reopened, and now it's mixed with anger towards Robert for trying to bully me. But I'm determined to get through this and come out stronger on the other side. We're moving forward with our plans, despite this setback. The scholarship fund is still in the works, and we're even considering expanding it to cover more than just Millbrook. It feels good to have something positive to focus on amidst all this negativity. Mike has been a great support too. He's been driving up from Millbrook on weekends to help out however he can, whether it's going through old documents or just providing a distraction when I need one. It's reminded me how lucky I am to have such long-standing friendships. As for the company, we're pushing ahead with our new project launches. I refuse to let Robert and Lizzie's actions derail everything we've worked for. If anything, this has made me more determined to succeed. I know this fight is far from over, but I'm ready for it. I've survived worse, and I'll survive this too. I'll keep you all updated as things progress. Update 3. The last few months have been a roller coaster, but I finally have some good news to share. The lawsuit against me has been dismissed. My legal team did an amazing job. They presented all the evidence we had gathered, including the PI's findings and testimonies from other entrepreneurs who had been approached by Robert and Lizzie. The judge saw right through their scheme and not only dismissed their case, but also ordered them to pay my legal fees. But that's not all. During the proceedings, it came to light that Robert and Lizzie had been running a complex fraud scheme for years. They would target successful young entrepreneurs, spin sob stories to gain their trust, and then either convince them to invest in non-existent projects or sue them for imaginary slights. The authorities are now investigating them for fraud and money laundering. It turns out that their real estate business was just a front for their scams. They're facing serious charges and could be looking at significant jail time. As for me, I'm relieved it's over, but I'm also exhausted. This whole ordeal has taken a toll on me, both emotionally and professionally. Some of our investors got spooked by the lawsuit and pulled out. We're stable, but it's going to take some time to rebuild the trust and momentum we had before. Simone has been incredible through all of this. She stood by me, believed in me, and kept our company running while I dealt with the legal mess. I don't know how I got so lucky, but I'm grateful for her every day. We've decided to take a vacation once things settle down at work. We both need it after the stress of the past few months. On a brighter note, our scholarship fund is up and running. We've already awarded 3 scholarships to students from Millbrook High School. It feels good to be able to give back to the community that supported me when I was growing up. I've decided to take a step back from the public eye for a while. No more interviews or podcasts for now. I want to focus on my company, my relationship with Simone, and my own healing. This experience has taught me a lot about trust, family, and resilience. I've realized that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who stand by you through thick and thin. Simone, my team, my true friends, they're my real family. As for Lizzie, I feel nothing. The anger and hurt have faded. I pity her in a way. She threw away a good life, a loving family, for what? A life of lies and schemes. In the end, she lost everything. I hope she gets the help she needs, but I know now that I can't be the one to provide it. I'm looking forward to the future now. Simone and I are talking about getting married next year. I'm excited about some new projects we're working on at the company. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe easy. Life is good, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Your kind words and encouragement have meant more than you know.